Hello, everyone, and welcome to Facebook Live with the Horticulturists. We are the Horticulturists here to answer your gardening questions and talk about what's happening out in our gardens this time of year. Our topic today is bulbs for bees. So we're going to be talking all about planting bulbs and specific ones that are going to be great for pollinators. So if you have questions in particular about that, feel free to start adding them to the comments, or any gardening question, start adding it into the comment box. My name is Candace Hart. I'm the State Master Gardener Specialist here for U of I Extension. And I tend to love to answer questions on anything flower related. So annuals, perennials, landscaping, cut flowers. That is my area of interest. But I have two other great horticulturists who like to talk about other things. So Kelly, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Kelly Alsop, and I am also I'm a horticulture educator based out of Bloomington. And my specialty is integrated pest management. And I'm passionate about pollinators and kind of this ecological gardening where you're gardening for wildlife. I do have another specialty that I don't really love to talk about, but that's how I originally met Candace, is I do know a lot about greenhouse production and house plants and all that sorts of things. And then I am a weekend warrior as far as vegetable gardening is concerned.
Awesome.
And my name's Ryan Pancaw, horticulture educator out of Champaign County. And I definitely am a weekend warrior like Kelly in the vegetable garden. I like to plant a big vegetable garden and try new things every year. But my area of expertise or first specialty is arboriculture and forestry. So everything kind of woody plant related is probably my largest area of expertise and my favorite thing to talk about. And second to that would be native plants. You know, all the concepts of ecological gardening that we can apply to, you know, our yards and in landscapes around our homes. So those are my kind of big interest areas.
Awesome. Okay, so those of you who are hopping on, feel free to start asking those questions in the comments. But I think we're going to kick it off by just talking a little bit about why bulbs are so important for bees, and also kind of why we're even talking about it right now in the fall. So Kelly, you want to kick us off? I think you've got some great info to start us off with.
Yeah. So, being so passionate about pollinators, what we are finding is that in a garden setting, the pollinators really are lacking in their floral resources 2 times of the year. We have early spring when there's not a lot blooming. The trees have yet to flower. And then we have the late fall where there's tends to be a lack of floral resources and not as much blooming in the garden. So when we think about early spring, a lot of these bees, we have solitary bees, and then we have social bees like bumblebees and honeybees. But the majority of our bees that pollinate in our garden are solitary bees, and 30% of them will overwinter in the pith of stems, meaning don't cut back your garden this fall. And the other 70% will overwinter in the ground. And so they're going to, as it starts to warm, they're going to start coming out. And they're going to be looking for floral resources, and they're not going to find a lot. So a way that a gardener can really help with that is adding some early springing perennials or some bulbs. So these are some of the bees that you'll actually see early in the spring. The queen bumblebee, we know all the male bumblebees have died out, and all the females the worker bees have died out. And she's going to start laying eggs in the spring and create her little social hive all over again. But she needs some food. There's a particular bees like the mason bee that really only comes out in the spring, and the rest of the time of the year they are overwintering as larvae or pupa. And so when you think about it, some of these bees really need some of those early floral resources. So I did have another slide, and because I do talk about bulbs, but there are really a lot of other things that you can think about planting in your yard for these bees. And a lot of these are probably, especially the woody ornamentals are probably well known to Ryan, and has some of these, and they're going to bloom a little bit earlier in the spring and give them those floral resources. And then the other ones are perennials, like prairie smoke, Virginia bluebells, that are really just those really cool early spring bloomers. So Ryan, are any of these particularly a favorite of yours as far as the woodies?
Well, a new favorite of mine, or an up and rising favorite, is Virginia sweetspire. I had kind of forgot about that plant until, I saw a lot in Southern Illinois, where I used to live and work for a number of years before coming to Extension here, and now living in Central Illinois. And maybe 2 years ago, a master gardener included that in a design for a garden that I've just have absolutely loved it. I have plans to plant some around my porch, and some of the reason why I like it so much is not only the floral resource it provides to insects, but that wonderful fragrance that it gets. I mean, when you're in that garden space in the springtime, when those things are blooming, it's just filled with that scent. And then now this time of year, you start to get really awesome fall color. So that's just one that kind of fell off my list for a number of years. It's a near native, not quite native to here, a few states away, I believe. But maybe it's native to Southern Illinois. I guess I don't know for sure if it barely gets into Southern Illinois, but very cool plant. But yeah, definitely tops my list. Blueberries is another one I love, and really kind of not a native plant, but I love the fact that it's edible. You're producing an edible crop out of your landscaping. It's attractive, while it's flowering. The berries are actually very attractive during the summer, and then in winter or in fall time, you get the beautiful fall color out of them. You typically. And then in the wintertime, they're still kind of interesting because they have somewhat red growth on their new, the tips. So another plant that I think is maybe underused, but there's always the caveat with blueberries that you need to have acidic soil. So that's, always have to caution folks before they plant. You need to soil test and plan ahead for that. But yeah, just going down your list, those are a couple that are just kind of newer ones that are, moving up on my personal list here in the last few years.
So Candace, I do show Pasquet flower here. That's the purple one. And then the white one is goat's beard.
Yep.
A lot of people think that they can't plant pollinator-friendly perennials in a shade garden. Can you talk about a couple of your favorites?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, so on your list, you've got bluebells, of course. That's one of my favorites that pops up in my kind of part shade, part of my shade garden. One of my favorite spring blooming perennials is hellebores, of course. And I don't know if I saw that on your...
It's in the wrong...
Oh, yeah, there it is, hellebores. Yeah, that's for sure probably my absolute favorite spring because it's so early in the spring. Like it is the first thing to flower in any of my perennials. I love my bleeding hearts that come up, although I don't know pollinator wise, I don't know how much they provide. But yeah, that's a couple of those early things I can think of in the shade.
Oh gosh, I've always got to throw in my favorite shade shrub. Kelly, you can probably guess what it is. Bush. Which is a really early flowering shrub. It's one of those the first woody plants you see that really have flowers in the spring. And I mean, I guess why I've just loved it so much over the years is it's just a tough plant. I mean, it competes in nature. It competes with some of our invasive species like bush honeysuckle or something that could be in the same spot. So that's why, I mean, that's what's built that love in me for it is just I've seen it out in, a natural setting and just really doing well. And, filling that void that especially when you remove bush honeysuckle or something, it's a native plant that can kind of fill that niche and just does wonderfully in a shade garden. So as well.
And that plant again is?
Oh, spice bush.
I didn't hear you say the word.
Spice.
I knew what it was. I just
Oh.
didn't say your thunder.
Ryan's favorite plant ever, spice.
Hey, for shade, my favorite shade shrub.
What's your favorite sun shrub?
Oh gosh, that is so much bigger. It's hard to
I know.
pick a single favorite.
More options.
I don't know. You know, Kelly, I know this is one of your favorites. I really love Father Gila, and
I love Father Gilliam.
it's not it's another near native. So
Yeah.
I'm recommending a native here, but man, that's just been one of those shrubs that between it's got really interesting, like spiky, flowers in the springtime and just beautiful fall color. There's a million different cultivars out there of it that stay compact or you can get a bigger shrub or a smaller shrub. Just one that ever since I learned that plant, it's always one that kind of tops my list of ornamental beauty.
Yeah.
And there's really only one downfall, and that is it takes a little while to establish.
Yeah. And it's fairly slow growing. It's which is good or bad, and depending on what you're wanting. Yeah.
I mean,
I like that. Yeah.
slow going for a tree,
Well,
that's lifetime. Slow going for a shrub, I think you could wait 3 to 5 years to really get the beauty. I mean, mine is 3 years old. I see the beauty all the time, and it's gonna start. It hasn't turned yet, but it's gonna start.
One of my old favorite full sun shrubs, or just really versatile shrubs. Now, this doesn't relate to flowering, but it was burning bush until I learned it was invasive. One of the just the saddest points in my career. It's like, oh, that plant's an invasive. I mean, I've planted it, I've pruned it, I've just put it in all kinds of spaces on the landscape, and that was a really sad one to have to take off my list.
We might have to vote you out.
I mean, the fall color on it, you can't beat it.
It is, but I didn't really understand the invasiveness till I saw it in the forest. I'd read that for a number of years. I witnessed it in a couple places in southern Illinois, and now where I live in central Illinois, in a rural kind of spread out neighborhood, it's a common weed in the forest that I'm clearing, and I don't even know where the nearest burning bush is to my house. But I'm cutting it out of my woods line, and I have about 1.5 acres of woodlands that I manage to try and keep it out of. So it's gotten further and further down my list over time, just because I've had to deal with it, But ornamental beauty of that plant, man, just almost can't be beat in the fall time, and its prunability is one of the things that I love. You could hand prune it, you could cut it to the ground and let it grow back. I mean, it's just a tough all around plant. I can remember a lot of jobs as an arborist. Hand pruning a whole row of burning bush. I mean, that's like just a wonderful afternoon. If the weather's nice.
Now, but wouldn't, so what would be, if somebody's thinking about planting a viburnum right now, what would be a really good, perhaps native alternative to that?
Well, you just said one. You just said viburnum.
Did you say viburnum?
Yeah.
I think you meant euonymus.
Yeah.
If you're trying to plant a euonymus replacement.
I mean, you just talked about how amazing burning bush is, Ryan. We're supposed to be discouraging people from planting this shrub, so give them a good idea of what they can plant instead.
Yeah, well, you mentioned a favorite of mine that we've got a number of native viburnum species that do well in sun and part shade. That I think are just about the best replacement, because they're going to have they don't have that fire red color necessarily, but they have a lot of different colors in the fall and a lot of really pretty, purples and kind of deeper red colors is what most of my viburnums kind of turn to almost a rusty orange at times. So it really fills in the void of that fall color, but also many of them hold berries into the wintertime, and you'll see that attracting songbirds and things. One that I've seen in cultivation more that is also a favorite of mine from the natural world for a shade location is Eastern Wahoo. It's in the euonymus genus, so it's similar to burning bush, and it, especially when it gets a little more sun in a full shade setting, I don't think it has quite as much fall color, but in a little part sun, part shade setting, it has pretty good fall color, almost as red as burning bush at times. But also really neat, interesting little drupes. The fruits that are on it are just one of the most interesting shaped fruits of any shrub you'll see, and actually have pretty ornamental beauty for a fruit hanging on the shrub. one
Yeah,
that,
I have one in a kind of a part shade spot. It's only a year or two old, so I'm waiting for it to kind of start looking awesome, but I'm excited about it. Okay, I think we've had a couple questions come in, so let me scroll back up here. We had one come in ahead of time on bulbs. So Jean asked, what bulbs will thrive in my front yard? It's on the north side of the house and has 3 mature trees, 2 lindens, and a beech. So what bulbs would you recommend for front yard and a shady north side of the house?
Well, actually, when you think about bulbs, if it's too wet, that is the number one bulb killer. You can't have too wet of a landscape.
Yeah.
And shade really doesn't have to be something that you consider for a lot of our spring bulbs, because they actually come up and bloom before the trees even leaf out. So a lot of the Siberian squill, the snowdrops, the crocus, the grape hyacinths, they're going to be wonderful for you as far as planting, and you don't have to worry about having the shade from that tree.
Yeah. And a lot of those can even be naturalized in the lawn too, because you can let that foliage age within the lawn before really it's time that you have to start mowing. So good ones. Any other ones you can think of that would be?
It's not really planted as a bulb, but it was on your list, Kelly. I really love bluebells, and would take all kinds of shade. I mean, they naturally grow in a fully shaded forest setting. With a lot of these, and we touched on this maybe a little bit already, but with a lot of these, that flower displays really early, and then you don't have much the rest of the year. So like in the case of bluebells, I like them in places where there's something that's going to fill in around, or you just have not much there. Kind of fade away by, I don't know, is it like maybe June sometime? They're starting to kind of wither away and they just disappear. You don't even have leaves really for the rest of the year. So that's maybe a drawback with some of those natives, but that's just their life cycle. That's how they grow every year. So
yeah, you intermix them with other things so that the other things coming up kind of hide that aging foliage. Yeah.
So I would add winter aconite to that list. So when it comes to deciduous trees, I think, again, let me redo the list. It's grape hyacinth, crocus, winter aconite, snowdrops, and Siberian squill will all do well under a deciduous tree. And actually, snowdrops and Siberian squill will actually grow in the shade of evergreens.
Nice. Even better.
Another one that I have kind of naturally growing in my yard in areas just like this, north side of the house, shaded, is spring beauties. We kind of talked about this before we went on air today. They're just one of my favorite flowers in the springtime. Now, they're not very big, little tiny ones. And again, they come out and kind of do their thing and just fade away. But I live on the edge of a forest that has them in it. And so they're just all across my lawn and everything. So every spring, it's like, I'm totally waiting until the spring beauties are done before I ever mow. I'm sure it annoys my neighbors that my yard gets kind of tall in spring, but and I've been able to really, like, in just the last 3 or 4 years of living there, really boost their numbers across my yard, and they're just everywhere. They're in the mulch of my landscaping beds and all over the place. So really neat one, and not super duper showy by itself because it's a little tiny flower. But when you plant them, when they're in mass, like across my whole front yard, they really have a display. I've even had pretty good luck transplanting them as bulbs when I've ran across them. When I'm digging in an area to plant something and some little bulbs come up, I know in my yard, those little tiny bulbs are probably either snow crocus or spring beauty. So I've just kind of moved those around as I've found them when I was digging and had pretty good luck that way. Where I think if you're going to actually buy them, spring beauties probably come as either seed. You would start from seed in trays, or they would come as like small potted plants that you could either plant in the fall or you could plant in the springtime as full.
Hey, Ryan, since you're talking about them, you might as well show us a picture of them.
Oh, I do have a slide. Here, let me show you guys the slide. I'll just give you an example of those.
And you made a good point there, Ryan, that I think the importance with any of these smaller bulbs is to really plant them in mass, like you said, because that way you have the biggest kind of impact of all of them flowering at once, and you can really notice them a lot better.
And
So here you guys should be seeing my screen.
beautiful.
So this is just a picture of a close-up of this patch of spring beauties in a park near my house. This actually isn't my yard. My yard looks pretty similar in springtime, where you can see just all these tiny flowers mixed in. There's a close-up of them on the left. If you really get down close and look between those nectar guides and the pretty just pink that's mixed into the flower, it's a lot more than the white you kind of see from far away. So it really does have a lot of beauty up close. But in mass like this, they have an effect. And you can see that in this particular park, some dandelions mixed in is another, that's the thing that I'm usually kind of liking to have as a floral resource in the early spring. But yeah, I wish I had a great picture of these, like kind of across my yard and through my landscape beds, because it's probably not as dense as you see here in this grass, but there's a sprinkling of these just all across my backyard and front yard in the springtime. So really pretty, just one of my favorites from the woodlands, and just one of the really the earliest spring ephemeral wildflowers that you see in Illinois. So really cool one.
Yeah, it's a pretty one. Okay, we've had some other questions come in on other topics. If you've got questions on bulbs, keep them coming. If you've got other gardening questions, keep them coming. We had a question over on YouTube. Jean asked, how do you tell the difference between bush honeysuckle and invasive honeysuckle? Ryan, you got to...
Well, yeah, I can handle that. I mean, I guess we're probably parsing terms here that we're talking about the common name that we refer to, bush honeysuckle. When we say that, I guess what most people mean is really probably 3 or 4 different species of honeysuckle shrub that come from Asia, that when we brought them here to the States, because our climate is similar, they just go nuts. And they've spread to if you drive around Champaign-Urbana, I could probably show you those in a lot of neighborhoods. They grow in yards, they grow in natural areas where they're really a problem. And I'm guessing since you're asking this question, you probably know this too, but they are just one of the biggest threats to native plant diversity and forested ecosystems across Illinois. They are incredibly shade tolerant, and they just take over. They drown out all the spring beauties and bluebells and all those things that we'd like from the native standpoint. So how do you tell the difference? So really, when we're talking about invasive honeysuckle and bush honeysuckle, we're really talking about kind of that same group of plants in the same genus. So they're different species, but probably all in the same genus of Lonicera, which would be the honeysuckle, the genus that most honeysuckles are in. And so the best way to ID this plant that I found, well, first off, I guess there's some of its growth habit is identifiable, because it kind of has these arching stems. And if you observe it in nature, the stems kind of come out of the ground and they kind of arch. And that's what I can always, even when the leaves aren't on, I can pick out that branching pattern out of the forest, just because I've looked at so many acres of that plant and seen it for so many years. But one of the key identification features is that it leaves out really early in the year and it leaves really late in the fall. So there's certain times a year where when I drive around Champaign-Urbana or a local forest preserve or wherever I might be, it just sticks out like a sore thumb because it's the only thing with green leaves. So that would be, 2 to 3 weeks before our native trees and shrubs start to get their leaves. It comes in the springtime, and then probably 2 to 3 weeks later in the fall, it holds its leaves. So so that's one of the best ways to identify it, is just drive around and look around your yard at that time, at those couple of windows in time. And if you have a green leafy shrub, then pretty good bet that it's one of the bush honeysuckle species. They have opposite leaves, opposite up and down the twig. So that's another one. Really that timing window is about the best time to look at to try and identify them. But what's also nice about that is that that's a great time for control, especially in the fall, like right now, as we get into our native trees and shrubs lose their leaves. The only thing out there that we're gonna be able to see is bush honeysuckle. And so it helps us not only identify it, but it's a great time for cutting off that plant and treating the stump with a herbicide, because the natural processes in that woody plant right now are to take all of the energy out of its leaves and stems and store a lot of that in its roots for next year before it leaves out. So if we cut off the stump and we apply a chemical right now, or even later in fall, it just sucks all that systemic herbicide right down into the roots and kills the plant really well. Whereas in that spring window, when it's leafing out, it's kind of the opposite process for a woody plant. It's pumping all that energy back up out of the roots into the leaves. So I would not want to treat bush honeysuckle in the springtime when it's leafing out. You're going to be fighting against its natural processes to actually get that herbicide down into the roots. So I could talk all day about bush honeysuckle. Go to another question or another topic. But,
let us know if you have any follow-ups on that. Okay, let me scroll back up here. Kelly, an insect question for you. Laurel asked, they discovered their first monarch caterpillar about an inch in size yesterday on their milkweed patch. Will they make it this late in the year? What do you think? The monarch caterpillar right now, is it going to make it?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, you think it'll have?
I think they know what they're doing, and they're not, like when. Sorry, let me compose myself. It's like when the tropical milkweed. Have you guys grown the tropical milkweed? It's one of the things that people were talking about was that because it stays in bloom later, will it disrupt the monarch cycle? And I think it would be very hard to disrupt the monarch cycle since they have that kind of internal, they're going to feed and pupate and then fly south. And I don't think any amount of flowering is going to deter them. It's all going to be temperature related. So do I think it will be fine? Absolutely, I do. I think, the caterpillar is in that caterpillar stage for 7 to 10 days. It's in the pupate stage for 2 to 3 weeks. And I think it'll be fine.
Good. Excellent. Good news. Okay, let's see some other questions here. Matthew asks, what are your thoughts on invasive jumping worms? This would be a great question for our previous guest, Chris Evans, but do you guys have any updates on jumping worms that you've seen lately?
I could explain just a little bit of their basic biology.
Let's do that a little bit.
Jumping worms, another non-native species, obviously, we've brought here. Really all earthworms in this continent are non-native. So that's always an interesting fact in all this discussion to talk about. But the issue with jumping worms is that they are really super aggressive. They establish really well here. They spread quickly, and they consume a lot of the litter layer in the forest. So what we think is going to happen as those things spread, they're probably unstoppable at this point, that they're going to eventually spread as far across our continent as the climate will allow, drive a change in plant communities because they're going to consume so much of that organic matter. They're going to take organic matter out of forested systems where it normally is there and present in the soil. So another big threat to forested ecosystems. But I've been, one of the folks that I've talked to the most about jumping worms is Trisha Bethke from Morton Arboretum. She does research on those and really knows a lot about how they're moving around the northeastern part of our state or the northern part of our state. And gosh, it's like every time I talk to Trisha, she's saying they've spread even further. We found them in all these new areas. So I think over time, as folks learn how to identify these, we're going to find out they're in a lot more places than we really understood. How they got here is they were brought in as fishing bait. And, the name jumping worm they're named that for a reason. They wiggle around, they writhe around and thrash when you disturb them. Makes a great, on a hook for a fish to attract a fish. That's a great bait species. So we find them a lot around lakes in areas where fishermen they've gotten loose for one way or another from recreational fishing. Their life cycle is a little different than a lot of other earthworms that you see. A lot of earthworms, you can find a full mature earthworm just about year round if you dig around and dig deep enough and dig up a big enough clump. Whereas these guys, they actually overwinter in I don't know, Kelly, is it a cocoon or I forget what they call the structure that those worms would be in, but each spring they emerge then and and it's not till about midsummer that they get large enough that we're going to be able to see them. And, midsummer, maybe it's more like June they become active as the growing season starts, they hatch. And so when I have somebody that calls me in April and says, "Oh my gosh, I've got jumping worms all over the place," you probably don't, or we can't identify them at that point because they're so small. So it's really, I usually tell people it's, around mid-April or midsummer or so on in through till now, and until they kind of go dormant for the winter, that we should be able to find them. And if you go online, there's some pretty good identifying features. The habit, how they thrash around and they jump, so to speak. But then the clitellum, like that little band that's around an earthworm near its, I guess, I don't know if you call it the head, but you guys can picture that little band around an earthworm, these at one end of it. And that's a much lighter color on jumping worms. It's almost a whitish kind of color, as opposed to some of the other like less invasive or less troublesome earthworms we have. It's kind of the same color as the rest of the worm. So
yeah, they're pretty distinctive when you see them.
But yeah, if you have questions, a lot of us folks at Extension have training and identification. Ask somebody that you know, and really, is there a great solution to once you find them and you have them there? I don't think we really have any control measure that's doable on any kind of a larger scale. So I mean, when folks find them, it's really sad. It's just like, well, you have them.
Yeah.
Kind of maybe plan for that. And, as far as just keeping forested plants or plants in your shaded beds more healthy.
So Ryan, I just looked at the state map of jumping worms. Personally, I don't think Candace and I could identify a jumping worm, even though I looked at the state map and McLean County is confirmed, and so is Woodford County. Now, Champaign County is an area of concern. And then there's a few in the northern part of the state and a few in the southern part of the state. So I think, Candace and I are going to have to see it before we truly know how to identify it. And we would probably have to have a backup, but we would probably know that they're different.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm a little scared, looking at that map. I'm like, oh, wow, they're definitely, because I thought maybe they weren't in the central part of the state yet, but.
And I would guess they're probably somewhat underreported, just like you guys are pretty up on a lot of biota and how to identify it. And you two maybe wouldn't know how to, the only reason why I do is because one of those populations in Southern Illinois that was found, I was camping with some other families that had kids, and that was one of those Southern Illinois populations that was discovered. And that's because one of the ladies that was camping with us knew how to identify them and taught us all then once we found some. But it was kids just digging around in the shore of a lake and, oh, look at these worms. And, one of the moms knew what they looked like and could identify them. But I think pretty quickly a lot of folks can pick apart, can see that color contrast between the clitellum and the rest of the worm. So it's not super highly technical identification skills you need. But another thing is, in places where they're established, you can see the impact on the forest. You can really see that there's bare spots and missing litter, and just it's a lot different than an area that doesn't have them.
And they describe it as looks like coffee grounds.
Yeah, kind of. You can tell that upper layer. I mean, if you've looked at a lot of forest duff layers, like I have, you can really tell it's been disturbed or it's changed. It's different. It's thinner. Leaf material is smaller, more broken up. So.
Okay, awesome. Well, hopefully that helps. If you have other questions on those jumping worms, let us know. Okay, we've got a couple other questions come in. Mary's got a good bulb question here. Can I force some grape hyacinth now and plant them outside in the spring? Can you give some tips on forcing bulbs? So forcing grape hyacinth now and then planting them outside in the spring. I know I've never forced grape hyacinth.
No.
I've forced other things, but never grape hyacinth.
I've not seen it forced in the industry. So there's probably, maybe it just doesn't produce a beautiful enough pot, but.
Yeah, I think you'd have to have so many in a pot to really make it.
Yeah, I don't see why you couldn't force grape hyacinth and then just like you forest hyacinths. So, when it comes to, those hyacinths that you get from a florist or in these stores, what greenhouse people do is we pot up the bulbs in the soil, and then we put it in a cooler. And depending on what it is, it can be from anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks that they will go through that cooling period. So I don't know off the top of my head what cooling period requirement is for grape hyacinth or even hyacinth. But I think you could get them to forest. I guess the reason that the only thing that confuses me is why grape hyacinth. I mean, I know it's a cool plant, but I just would, if you're going to put all that effort into forcing a bulb, I would force something a little bit easier. Like the
Tulips.
paper whites are super easy to do during the holiday season. Amaryllis, when you think about an amaryllis, those bulbs that you buy in the store, those are ready to go. They've already been predetermined and ready to go for flowering. But
hey, just to go back to the basics, maybe you guys could explain a little better what we're talking about with forcing bulbs. I know that was a new concept to me a couple of years ago. Just maybe describe the biology at play there. I think it's kind of neat and interesting.
Okay. Well, being a florist and a greenhouse person, what we do is we, usually bulbs will come in, they'll start blooming after a particular vernalization period, which means winter. So they need that winter in order to create that flower display that you're going to see in the spring. So what greenhouse people do, they create that winter by using a cooler, because florists are always selling, potted hyacinths or, potted tulips. And, you can find those, any time of the year, not just in the spring. So that's what we mean by forcing. So what we're doing is we're taking it through a winter. Now, these bulbs don't always require as long as a winter as what we Illinois winters provide, or what we would, we'd hope they'd be a little shorter, but sometimes they only require maybe 4 weeks or 6 weeks as far as the vernalization requirement of that bulb. So, I guess you could, I do have a book behind me.
And Bruce was kind enough, Bruce put in a link to an article from Hort magazine that I think will probably be helpful for Mary. And she said she wants to do something different. And she hates the smell of paper whites, which I concur. Yes. They don't smell great. So I say go for it, Mary. You're just going to have to find out how much time you need for that vernalization. But otherwise, it should be a pretty simple process. Yeah.
And if Bruce put that article in, it's probably, would tell you what that requirement is.
Yeah. Thanks, Bruce, for sharing that. Excellent question. Yeah, I was just sitting on the porch the other day looking at my amaryllis pot, thinking I should bring that in soon and put it in the dark closet, let it rest so that I can bring it back out again and have it.
Too late
holiday
for Christmas.
I know. It happens.
But go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I was just going to say this particular pot I had in a cabinet in the garage, and I kind of forgot it was in there. So I pulled it out probably in like April this year. So I had some nice amaryllis bulbs this late spring. It was flowers. It was lovely.
So forcing actually goes back to a question that I'm sure all three of us get asked, is you get a bouquet, let's say for Easter, you get a thing of hyacinths, or Mother's Day, or even, a bulb, a nice bulb planter in the fall. What do you do once the flowers are done? You go ahead, you planted them in the ground. You plant them in the ground immediately. if it's in the spring, you can plant them in the ground and let the foliage die back. If it's more like the summer, you can just put those bulbs on their side and just put them in the garage until the next fall when you're ready to plant. But those things that you get from the store, you can actually plant them in your garden.
And either way, the key is that you leave that foliage on, let it photosynthesize until it's good and yellow, and then you got that energy stored back in the bulb.
But hyacinths are one of those bulbs that I tell people to plant yearly because it comes up the first year and it's big and huge and gorgeous. And then year 2 and 3 is just the flowers are not that big. It's not that bold.
Yeah.
So it tends to be one of the ones that I personally plant yearly.
And I don't even use hyacinth so much as a garden plant anymore. If I really want to enjoy it, I'll force it and have it as an indoor plant because really the main appeal of hyacinth is that fragrance. So to be able to have it indoors is really a bonus. Yeah. Okay, let's see what else we had come in. Jim asked, what are the best gardening plants in a greenhouse that will last year round? That could be a lot of things. But Kelly, if you had a greenhouse, what kind of plants would you grow in there year round? It sounds like is kind of what he's asking.
That is a pretty loaded question.
Right?
Any of my tropical house plants, any orchids, any succulents. I mean, I would even probably try to be growing, lettuce and some leafy greens, some herbs.
I think if I had a greenhouse, which is on my wish list, but I don't have. I really don't have a place for one. Is one of my problems. But man, if I had a greenhouse, I think I'd have some of those miniature fruit trees. Have you guys seen?
Oh yeah.
Those house plants. I just don't have a sunny enough spot in my house for any of those. Big, but that'd be kind of neat to have a little lemon tree or a lime tree.
Banana plants, yeah.
And if Candace had a greenhouse, she could actually, grow some cut flowers like what we did at the U of I greenhouse. We used to grow Austrameria and calla lilies and freesia. What else did we grow? And they really liked the cooler
temperatures
greenhouses. So we'd keep those really low. And so if you had a lean-to and an unheated greenhouse that leaned against your home where you could get some warmth, that would be perfect.
Yeah. I would even just do a big old roll of eucalyptus in there too and have my eucalyptus year round to cut off of. I mean, the possibilities are endless. we just need to get ourselves some greenhouse and a good spot to put it in.
I would love a greenhouse. I think that is everybody's on this call's wish list.
Yeah, I've been looking at all my plants on the deck, all my plants on the front porch, and I'm like, oh man, I need to bring those in soon. Then just trying to think about, okay, now where am I going to put them? If I had a greenhouse, they'd all go in there.
When it's bring your plants in time, I'm always like, are you going to make it or are you going to not? Some of them are not coming inside.
Right? Is this worth the space and the time?
On our last show, Kelly, you had a beautiful pencil cactus that you were showing off. I've got one of those that has got like the most beautiful pink color back into it inside all year, and I just can't stand to think about bringing it in where it'll have less light. And it'll start to lose, over the wintertime, it just loses all that before it goes back into it again. But gosh, I would love to have a greenhouse for that thing. I'd love for it to I keep it kind of pruned, but just let it get to be an enormous one with that beautiful pink tinge on all the, green stems. Real cool.
And when when we're bringing these house plants into our homes, not a greenhouse, they don't get enough sun. Sometimes they get too much draft from the heater vent. Sometimes they don't stay warm enough. Sometimes they don't stay cool enough.
Low humidity. Yeah.
So you're just basically keeping them alive. They're not thriving. They don't thrive until you put them back out on the porch in the springtime.
Yeah.
But it is fun to think about that though. Man, when this thing goes back out in the spring, it's just going to love it, and it's all that, beauty and wonder of springtime. But, one of the biggest problems I have in my house is the dryness. And some of it is that we have a wood stove, but I just look for 1,000 different ways to cure that. And I think I'm almost close to putting in a whole home humidifier. I've seen those, but it connects into your ductwork. And, as I've been discussing it with my wife, it's like, really? Do we really need a humidifier for all of our plants? Which I guess it probably helps us as humans to have like dry air,
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I don't know. They're kind of expensive though. I haven't taken that step, but that's what I think would be my next step of making my houseplants comfortable is to add some humidity on a big scale.
Nice.
Good plan. Okay, let's see. We've got another question here. We've got about 15 minutes or so left, so keep adding those questions in. Bruce asked earlier, I have a new property and I'm looking for any recommendations on how to prune a late summer, fall blooming hibiscus shrub. I have 3 and they have not been pruned in the last 2 years. So pruning a late summer, fall blooming hibiscus.
Well, so it kind of back to that, the 2 different kind of categories of shrubs we have, spring blooming and fall blooming shrubs. And so, our spring blooming shrubs, those that bloom like early in the year, they've overwintered those buds. So all those that bloom really early, you want to prune right after they bloom. Where, the things that bloom later in the year, like this hibiscus we're talking about, they grow those buds over the course of the growing season. So my recommendation would be to prune it in dormancy. So let the plant go dormant for the year and prune it this winter. And you're not going to prune off those flower buds because those have to grow after it starts growth in the spring. So pruning during dormancy then is the least impact we can have on a woody plant because it's dormant. Whereas if you pruned it, definitely wouldn't prune it right now because we're kind of getting late into the fall where you can actually have some harmful effects of pruning this late in the year. So at this point, you need to probably wait till dormancy. Really in future years, I've found hibiscus, Rosa Sharon, I found those pretty resilient when it comes to pruning and growing back to where I've done like midsummer prunings also on that. So,
they're pretty tough. Yeah.
Yeah, they take it pretty well. So.
Yeah. And that's a good question because we get asked that a lot is when do I prune this or that? And that's a good tip to think about when does it flower? When are those flower buds being put on? Yeah. So that's a great question. Anything else this time can you think of any other common shrub questions that we get that you would also want to do in the dormant season?
I guess one thing I always kind of discuss around this is that, those recommendations for pruning around flower bud formation are with respect to flowering, where there's a time and a place where you don't want to prune like that. And just if it's a shrub that's having a health issue, if it's unhealthy to start with, you're taking away a little bit of energy by not pruning in the dormant season. If you prune in the dormant season, you kind of have the least, impact to the plant's overall health. So, there's a time and a place where, you've got an unhealthy plant that should be pruned during the summer to preserve flowering because it just got done flowering, but probably should wait till winter to prune that just so you don't impact its health. So it has the most minimal impact on the health. So that's a question I get a lot. I think a lot of folks view pruning as something to boost health, which there's probably some reasons we could say it maybe does, like it maybe improves airflow and reduces fungal pathogens on the leaves. But really, pruning is something that you're taking energy away from that plant no matter how you do it. So in my opinion, like I'm going to prune most things in most woody plants in the dormant season. So I'm taking as little bit of energy away from it as I can with my pruning operation. So anyway.
Good tips.
Is there something you thought of for fall specific stuff or?
Well, Ryan, I was just cleaning out a garden. It was like one of those apocalyptic gardens, the Master Gardener projects where we weren't able to actually volunteer in our projects this year. And there was this oak leaf hydrangea. I think it was an oak leaf hydrangea that just had so many weed trees in it. I mean, it had red buds and, white mulberry. And so, you know what I did? I just cut it all back. And I knew when I was cutting it back that I could be potentially harming this plant. But part of me just doesn't want it to come back because it's just, I feel like we shouldn't have, it's never been pruned back. And I really feel like I want to kind of address those weed trees and not try to grow this hydrangea bush. So, even though I'm supposed to be a horticulture expert, I went against my instincts with this garden.
Well, and hey, like a lot of rules are made to be broken, and that's the spirit of experimenting and gardening is just trying stuff.
Yeah, I'll be curious to have you go back in the spring and see what's happening.
Yeah. I'll probably come back in the spring and there'll be red bud and mulberry and no hydrangea.
Well, and that's a difficult situation to address where you have a shrub that has all kinds of weedy stuff coming up through it of other trees, other wood. And it's just like, what do? Do you cut it, the weedy stuff back to the ground? I'd really be afraid to ever treat those stumps with a herbicide for fear of it, getting in the plant I want. I mean, some of them you can hand dig out, but then you're going to disturb the root system of the shrub you like. It's just, what do you do? And I think when I've had to deal with that, how I've dealt with that in my own landscaping is just to like those red buds or whatever it is under there. It's like once every couple months all summer, I'm hand pruning those back down to the ground and just, eliminating all the energy in the roots that way is just about the best way I've found. Other than, honestly, what you did, Kelly, is probably a pretty good move. Just kind of cut it down and reset everything there, see what comes up and manage it after that. Maybe you have a red bud patch there after that.
I'd be okay with red bud, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could work.
Candace, since we only have a few minutes, do you want me to hurry up and go through my slideshow of some spring blooming bulbs?
Yeah, let's answer this one more bulb question and then do that. So Kevin asked over on YouTube, we were talking about forced bulbs. Is there anything we can do to increase the likelihood of survival when planted in the ground post forced flowering? So any suggestions for making sure they do survive once you plant them after being forced?
I think you hit I'm sorry, I took over the screen. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, allow that foliage to ripen.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure it's not too wet.
Yep.
I think that's the big bulb killers, is cutting the foliage back too early and planting in a wet location.
I concur. Good tips, yeah. Okay, so you want to show some of these great ones and go to full screen if you can so we can see the pictures a little bigger. So hit like from current slide so it goes full screen.
Okay.
Slides.
I did that. Custom slideshow from current slide. Are you not seeing that now?
No.
Not yet.
Okay.
Well, that's okay. That's okay if not, but just try to.
I have a full screen on my slide. I don't know what is going on. Present on.
We're not seeing it that way, but I think everybody can still see.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, we can still see the pictures.
Or I could go, okay, here, I'll see if this makes a difference. No.
Or maybe just close out the format background box on the right and that'll at least make it a little bit bigger.
I am so sorry.
Go ahead, it's fine. We can see him. I just thought we'd make it a little bigger.
Current slide. Close out the background. You're killing me. I don't know what to do. Okay, never mind.
Don't worry about it. Go ahead.
Snowdrops are one of the earliest bulbs that bloom. They are, they are actually a welcome sight in the early spring. I mean, I'm sure all of us have seen a snowdrop patch and have been like, oh, wow, spring is here. So they're the first. Then we have crocus. Bees absolutely love crocus. And if you look at some of these pictures, you see the crocus is coming up when there's still dead leaves on the ground. So they really are a bright splash of color when really the rest of the landscape is very dormant. Siberian squill, we talked about how some of these bulbs will actually naturalize. These are ones that naturalize in people's lawns, and they look like they have a blue carpet. So when Candace said plant en masse, you're not going to plant 5 Siberian squill. You're going to plant 100 Siberian squill for you to really get that beautiful look. But plus, the bees will be more attracted the larger number of flowers that you have in the landscape. Winter aconite, this is one of the ones that will make you stop your car and pull over and go, what is that bright yellow flower blooming in the landscape? It's so low to the ground. It's like a buttercup, and you can tell that there's a bee, a honeybee pollinating it. Glory of the snow, it's not the most common ones that you hear about, but it is available in the industry. It has these strappy flowers. These are also very attractive to pollinators and bees. We have
Kelly, do you want to stop sharing and try it again? It seems to be frozen on our screen, so we're not seeing your new pictures.
Darn it.
I know. Maybe stop it and then start again and see if that refreshes it. Technology.
Yeah, I hate to miss the pictures. I know I got to see them before the show, and they're pretty awesome.
Okay, now we're seeing grape hyacinth, so that's better.
Cut up to you.
I know this is, so we have the snowdrops, we have the crocus. Again, you see the beautiful flowers in the sort of landscape. Then we have the Siberian squill, the winter aconite. Again, I said, this is my favorite way of describing them because I've definitely stopped my car on the side of the road and was like, what is that beautiful yellow flower blooming? They're so low to the ground. They're so gorgeous. Just a really great early spring, not used as heavily as it really should be. I meant, we should all be using these winter aconites to get that early color. Glory of the snow. This is another kind of underused bulb. It has these kind of like strappy like flowers, and they are very attracted to the bees. Then we have our grape hyacinths. Now, if anybody has grape hyacinths planted in their garden right now, they're starting to see that foliage come up because a lot of bulbs are starting to are looking for resources. They're starting to put on some growth and gather those resources before they go into another dormancy period. Your traditional hyacinths that are just absolutely gorgeous are the bees. Not only are they a wonderful smell, and Candace loves smelling them, the bees also love smelling them. Any kind of allium, these are really flowering onions, but there are so many different alliums out there in the industry, and they grow. There's some that bloom early, some that bloom mid-spring, some late spring. These bulbs tend to be a little bit more expensive, so it's a little bit more of an investment, but really seeing that in your landscape covered in bees in the early spring will be worth it. Mm-hmm. Then Crown Imperial, Fritillaria. Again, another not so used bulb, maybe because it looks a little bit more tropical and not your traditional daffodil and tulip, but it is a late spring bloomer for your bees that will bring them in the landscape. And so unlike the Siberian squill, you're probably going to plant, 5 to 20 of these, and they are going to be more expensive. So Candace, do you grow any of these?
Yeah, I have a lot of those just intermixed around my landscaping and under trees. I'm always adding a couple new ones every year, slowly but surely. Yeah. I actually have a couple boxes couple hundred tulip bulbs in my garage that just showed up the other day. So I'll be planting those this fall and using those as cut flowers. But yeah, I want to try to mix in some more of these too, for sure.
I mean, I'm starting to see gardeners really go crazy with alliums.
I love alliums. Yeah.
Me too. Yeah.
Super easy.
Really great. I mean, if you think about, you get your early spring, you notice I put them in 3 different categories. You get your early springs, your mid springs, and your late springs. And Candace really thinks about that when she's planting, because she doesn't want all of her tulips to be ready at once.
Yeah,
She
absolutely.
wants 3 different seasons. She might even, think about that a little bit more. But, we want 3 different seasons as gardeners too. So when I think about planting my landscape, I'm not going to just do all the early spring ones. I'm going to do a couple from early spring, like my grape hyacinth and my snowdrops. Then I'm going to do a couple from mid-spring, like my my other hyacinths, and then alliums, and then, hopefully have a late spring too with the alliums in the fritillaria.
Definitely. Okay. Any final bulb thoughts before we sign off today? I think we got some good tips.
Yeah, the bees need you guys. You can do it right now. This is something you at home can do in your garden for the health of bees. You can go out, you can spend a little bit of money on buying these bulbs, plant them in your ground. Right now, in the month of October, is the best time to plant spring bulbs. And plant them, and then in the spring you will be so happy you planted them, because not only will they bring you joy, but they will make your garden more wildlife friendly. And I know we all want that. We all want to offer those floral resources.
Excellent. Yeah, get out there and plant those bulbs. So a couple of reminders. Thank you everybody for joining us today and asking your awesome questions. Our next show is going to be on October 7th. And we're going to be talking about fall tree planting. So in October, you can get those bulbs planted. You can get your trees planted. We're going to talk all about it. And if you have other questions, between shows, don't forget we have that extension horticulture group, and we've got a link for that in the comments for you. So feel free to go join that group, and there's a ton of really great information and questions going on in that group. So thank you, everybody. We will see you in 2 weeks on the 7th. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. See ya.